Stop me if this sounds familiar. A prestigious AAA studio that used to release a very good game every other year has been on hiatus for the last 5 to 10 years. At every Game Award, at every Summer Games Fest, at every E3 back when we had E3s, you waited with bated breath hoping for a new announcement from them. When the exciting day finally did come and you got an announcement from this studio that you're a fan of, it was usually a cinematic trailer and didn't have a release date. You then would have to wait 1 to 2 additional years before you saw gameplay and got a tentative release date that was often pushed back 2 or 3 times with delays. In some instances, such as with Monolith's Wonder Woman game, they never kick the development hell phase of the game and the project is cancelled, and sometimes the studio is sadly even shut down. Other times the game is released at a steep $70 price tag, which seems like it could turn into $80 or even up to $120 in the future. It seems like prices are just going up and games are becoming more expensive. To make matters worse, it's rare that the fan base behind the game feels like this game really earns that price tag. The game is either too short or development feels rushed, even though the team had like a quadruple amount of the time that they normally do to make a game. Even worse is when mechanics that the devs clearly did not want to implement were forced in by the publisher. Often this is live service mechanics, battle passes, looter shooter elements, and it does not gel with the IP or story that is being told in the game. There is a ridiculous amount of examples of single-player action-adventure studios being repurposed into live service studios, the only problem being that the devs and the publisher clearly don't know how to operate a live service game, and it turns into a flop. It's the reason that Marvel's Avengers lost $63 million, and it's the reason that Suicide Squad Killed the Justice League lost $200 million. No one on the production side seems very happy about a lot of these things either. Often we hear about developers who are forced to implement live service mechanics to their game being frustrated that they had to do so. Often the publishers are dishing out hundreds of millions of dollars on games that didn't used to cost nearly as much. Team sizes are growing so bloated that effective communication is becoming a near impossibility, and it often seems that leadership becomes a bottleneck, hesitating to make decisions because they're worried that the wrong decision could lead to a loss of profit. Now, as I've just laid out here, there is not just one reason that games are taking a longer time to develop, costing more money, and leading to worse fan receptions and reviews. There's a lot of reasons that the games industry is suffering in the AAA space, and as a result, there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. Ironically, a one-size-fits-all solution is how we got into this mess in the first place. A lot of AAA companies saw how well Fortnite and Overwatch and other games in the live service space were doing and decided to chase that trend without understanding why those games worked. A lot of these corporate suits are making decisions out of greed, and it's led to a huge loss in public trust and revenue. Today, I'd like to go through something that we've seen work and be successful in the AAA game space that I would like to see more of. I'm talking about smaller scale games that aren't designed to have the biggest open world on the market, or the longest story, or the most hours of playtime. I'm talking about games like Spider-Man Miles Morales, Assassin's Creed Mirage, Uncharted the Lost Legacy. There are 2 big reasons that I, and I'm sure many other consumers, enjoy games like this. The first is that they are cheaper. They're not as expensive as some of the other AAA counterparts on the market, and as a result, I can justify purchasing more of them. The other great thing is that they're shorter. I know that some people will view this as a negative, but I don't think every game needs to try and be the next GTA or Red Dead Redemption or Assassin's Creed Odyssey or Fortnite. I'm okay with a game that has a 5-hour-long story and another 3 hours of open world content. There's something so refreshing and replayable about a game that I can complete in a single weekend. If on a Friday night, I recognize that I just basically have time to myself for Saturday and Sunday and have to go back to work on Monday, I'm far more likely to boot up something like Arkham City than The Last of Us Part 2, which I likely will not complete before I have to get back to work. From a development and publisher perspective, these games make a lot of sense as well. Often, they don't make quite as much as the big tentpole releases, but sometimes they sell on a pretty similar level. For example, Assassin's Creed Mirage sold on a similar level as some of the bigger RPG entries of the series. In the case of Spider-Man Miles Morales, it didn't sell quite as well as Spider-Man 1 or Spider-Man 2, but it still sold millions of copies and generated a huge profit for Insomniac, especially considering that these games take a fraction of the time and production cost in order to get made. I'd also argue that a big reason that a lot of these games end up not profiting as much as the more tentpole releases is because they're not advertised as tentpole releases. They're advertised essentially as glorified DLC. When you look back in the 2010s, which is an era of gaming that many of us still look back on fondly and long for the return of, that's what most games were like. Batman Arkham Origins was not some 70-hour-long experience. It was a story that could be completed in like 5 hours, and it had an open world with probably another 5 hours of stuff to do. The Mass Effect games were what, like 20 hours apiece, but they were all great, and now they add up to a singular, incredible 60-hour-long experience. I do want to be clear that I'm not arguing that this should be the trajectory for every AAA studio. I love that Rockstar and Naughty Dog and some other companies always push the limitations of the hardware and software to deliver the highest fidelity of graphics and gameplay imaginable. I'm certainly not saying that if they make Red Dead Redemption 3, they should strive to make a game on par with the first game rather than trying to continue evolving like they did with the second one. I'm not saying that if Naughty Dog chooses to make The Last of Us Part 3, that they should try to make a game on par with The Last of Us Part 1 in terms of graphics and length. We've evolved beyond that with The Last of Us Part 2, and with Naughty Dog, everyone's going to expect the next step there. They're going to expect even better graphics and potentially an even longer story. I'm also not saying that games like Fortnite and Marvel Rivals should ditch their live service components and become single-player story-driven games. What I'm arguing for is an ecosystem where there's more variety in the types of games I can purchase. I want studios to stop chasing trends and trying to capture the lightning in a bottle that other studios captured. We even saw this with the Arkham games. When Rocksteady really struck gold, we saw every action-adventure game start adapting the free-flow combat system and the stealth system and the detective elements of the Arkham games. And in pretty much every case, it was determined that, yeah, everyone else probably should have done their own thing because everything started feeling like a Batman game. The same is true in the 2020s, where everything has turned into some big open-world multiplayer live service Frankenstein monster. You get everything now kind of feeling like a hero shooter, even if that's not what the DNA of the IP calls for. For example, BioShock 4 for a long time has been rumored to include live service mechanics and an open world, and I can't help but wonder, is it even really a BioShock game at that point? I don't know. I think maybe you've changed the DNA of it too much and turned it into something else. In my opinion, one of the things that made the late 2000s and 2010s so great for gaming was that there was a variety. BioShock felt like BioShock, a first-person shooter that emphasized the world building and a really cool location and tied it into an awesome story with a plot twist. Assassin's Creed felt like Assassin's Creed, a game that relied on social stealth where you were trying to perform assassinations without being seen. Arkham felt like Arkham, an awesome free-flow combat system to make you feel like Batman as you defeated a multitude of villains across Gotham City. Mass Effect felt like Mass Effect, a narrative-driven game with a branched story that you got to participate in with a choice system. To be fair, we still see some of that today, and games are looking and playing better than they ever have. We're getting higher frame rates and higher resolutions than we've ever seen. We're getting in-game lighting and textures and character models that are unbelievable. I'm glad we're seeing some franchises like Resident Evil that aren't trying to use those evolutions in software and hardware to create massive open worlds or add live service elements to their games, but rather to simply create the best version of their current Resident Evil formula. Personally, I'd like to see more of that. Imagine the potential for a new Batman Arkham game on the PlayStation 5 and Series X in Unreal Engine 5 if Rocksteady had focused on doing that instead of trying to make a live service Suicide Squad game. It's been 10 years since Arkham Knight. That game was made on the Unreal Engine 3. Imagine the improvements that we could see graphically and from a gameplay perspective with that template reimagined for modern hardware. Another game that recently announced that they're doing something similar to this is Mafia. Mafia: The Old Country is going to be priced at $50 and is going to be more linear. I want to see more franchises and more games do this. Not everything needs to be an 80-hour-long game. Some games should be able to be completed in a weekend. There's very much a place on the market for those. Some games should emphasize pushing the hardware as much as they can, like Red Dead Redemption and GTA. But let's be honest, not every studio out there is equipped to make a massive GTA-sized game or a Fortnite-style live service product. The only way we're going to see a healthier ecosystem for the AAA space is if studios really stick to their strengths and if each studio has a different strength. That's going to provide a lot of variety and that's going to satiate a lot of gamers who have different tastes. There's room for Fortnite and GTA and Red Dead Redemption and The Last of Us, but there's also room for Arkham Cities and Spider-Man Miles Morales's. Let's get more of those into this ecosystem. Not every game has to be the most ambitious thing ever, and in recent cases that has led to a lot of games with tons of cut content because it simply couldn't be put in the game, or games getting canceled altogether like Wonder Woman. It's okay for a game to just play to its strengths and know what it's good at and start pre-production with an attainable goal, not something that's going to be very difficult to put together. The result of adding variety to the AAA space and not trying to force every game to be this massive RPG or live service product is going to result in faster turnaround times, more clear communication with the publishers and the development teams. It could likely lead to more affordable games and more games that people like me could play because we don't have just 60 hours in the next month to play a new Assassin's Creed game. Those are my thoughts on the matter. I'd like to see more games that are smaller scale and play to the strengths of individual studios. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and we will see you guys in the next one.